Hello, channel family. Before we start, if this story touches your heart, please leave a like and let me know in the comments what country you're watching from. If you enjoy our content, it's very important that you subscribe to the channel to help us reach more and more people who need to hear testimonies from those who faced the greatest hardships of their lives with Jesus Christ in their hearts. What I'm going to tell you today changed my life forever, and I need to share it because I know many of you have gone through something similar. My name is Michael. I'm 45 years old, and for 2 decades, I had the honor of being the priest at St. Jude's Parish. It was more than a job. It was my entire life, my family, and my purpose, all wrapped up in one place. In today's story, you'll find out how I was publicly accused of being a thief by the very man I looked up to, my own bishop. You'll see how I was stripped of my collar, cast out from the church I called home, and left with nothing but my faith, all for a crime I didn't commit. It was the darkest moment of my life, a betrayal that cut deeper than any knife. But you will also witness how God works in mysterious ways. Today, you will see how I, a disgraced priest with no power or voice, managed to orchestrate a divine reckoning. You'll learn how I used the bishop's own pride and secrets to bring the absolute truth into the light, leading him to confess his own sins before the entire city during a live broadcast. Listen to my story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? My life at St. Jude's was simple but fulfilling. I knew every family by name, baptized their children, and mourned with them in their losses. Our parish, located in the small city of Providence Falls, wasn't wealthy, but it was incredibly rich in community and spirit. We were a true family, bound together by our love for God and for one another. I honestly thought I would serve there until my last days on this earth. One of my proudest achievements was our Hope for the Homeless Fund. Our community was so generous, always donating what little they could to help those who had fallen on hard times. I managed the books myself, with meticulous care, because I believed every single penny was a sacred trust given to us by good-hearted people. It was my solemn duty to ensure it reached those in desperate need. Overseeing our diocese was Bishop Alistair Cromwell. He was a man who commanded respect wherever he went. He was charismatic, incredibly ambitious, and had a powerful voice that could make you feel the presence of the Lord in the room. He often spoke of grand projects and the importance of the church's public image. I truly admired him, even if his focus on appearances sometimes felt a world away from our humble parish work. It all started with a small inconsistency, a single donation from the fund that didn't quite add up in the year-end report. At first, I dismissed it as my own error. After all, I'm only human. But my conscience wouldn't let it rest. I started digging, staying late in my small office, comparing old paper ledgers with the new digital records. I felt a cold, hard knot forming in my stomach as the numbers simply refused to align. Over several weeks of sleepless nights, that small error grew into a gaping hole. Thousands, then tens of thousands of dollars were missing, siphoned off systematically before they ever had a chance to reach the charity's account. I followed the digital trail, my hands trembling as I uncovered transaction after transaction. The path didn't lead to a clumsy thief or a simple system glitch. It led directly to a private slush fund, one controlled by none other than Bishop Cromwell himself. With the evidence compiled on a small, encrypted drive in my pocket, I felt a strange mix of terror and resolve. I requested a private meeting with Bishop Cromwell, naively hoping to give him a chance to repent, to return the money without destroying the faith of our people. His office was as grand as I remembered, with dark wood, leather-bound books, and a window that overlooked the entire city. I calmly laid out the printouts on his polished desk, showing the clear path the money had taken from our charity fund to his private accounts. Listen to this story to the end and tell me, what would you have done in my place? The bishop's charismatic smile didn't just fade. It curdled into something cold and menacing. He looked at the papers, then at me, and let out a soft, dismissive laugh. "Faith is a currency, Michael," he sneered, his voice low and dangerous. "And you are a poor man who doesn't understand wealth." He didn't deny it. Instead, he offered me a promotion to a wealthier parish far away. a significant salary increase, and a simple condition: my absolute and unending silence. He was offering me a piece of the poison, expecting me to drink it gladly. My heart pounded in my chest, but my voice was steady when I refused. I told him this wasn't about me or him. It was about the homeless people who were sleeping on cold streets because of his greed. It was about the trust of every person who dropped $1 into our collection plate. I told him he needed to confess and make things right. I wasn't threatening him. I was pleading with him, priest to priest, man to man. He just stared at me, his eyes devoid of any light or warmth, as if I were a bug he was about to crush. A week later, he chose his stage. At the annual diocesan assembly, in front of hundreds of fellow clergy and parishioners, Bishop Cromwell stood at the pulpit, his face a mask of sorrowful duty. He spoke of a painful discovery, a betrayal from within. Then, he said my name. He held up skillfully forged documents, bank statements, and ledgers that had been twisted to show me as the mastermind, the thief who had preyed on the generosity of his own flock. I tried to speak, to defend myself, but my voice was lost in the collective gasp of the crowd. In that moment, he stripped me of everything. He publicly revoked my clerical duties, my collar, my very identity. It is a profound sorrow when a shepherd entrusted with the flock becomes the very wolf we must guard against, he declared, his voice booming with false righteousness. I stood there, frozen, as the faces of my friends, my spiritual family, turned from confusion to shock, then to condemnation. My life, as I knew it, was over. I was cast out, branded a traitor by the very man I had tried to save. To understand the depth of that betrayal, you have to understand what St. Jude's was to me. I wasn't born into a family of means. I grew up right here in Providence Falls, in a small house where my father worked at the local factory, and my mother made sure my brother and I never went to bed hungry. My calling to God wasn't a lightning bolt from the sky. It was a quiet whisper that grew louder over the years, a steady pull towards a life of service that felt more like coming home than a choice. My years in the seminary were formative. I wasn't the most gifted speaker or the most charismatic leader. I was the quiet one who spent extra hours in the library, the one who found God not just in Scripture, but in the discipline of study and the humility of prayer. I had a mentor, an old priest named Father Thomas, who taught me that a priest's job was to wash feet, not to sit on a throne. That lesson became the foundation of my entire ministry. When I was first assigned to St. Jude's, it was considered a forgotten parish. The building was old, the congregation was small, and morale was low. But I saw something beautiful there. I saw families who had attended that church for generations, people with deep roots and even deeper faith. I didn't see a failing parish. I saw a sleeping giant, a community just waiting for someone to believe in it again. So that's what I did. I believed. My first few years were spent not in the pulpit, but in the living rooms and hospital beds of my parishioners. I learned their stories, memorized the names of their children, and shared in their joys and their sorrows. I started a youth group with just 3 kids in a dusty basement room. We organized potluck dinners where the food wasn't fancy, but the fellowship was rich. Slowly, painstakingly, we started to rebuild our community from the inside out, based on love and mutual respect. I remember one family in particular, the Garcias. Their youngest son, Leo, was diagnosed with a rare illness, and the medical bills were crushing them. They were too proud to ask for help. So, without making a big show of it, I organized a work crew from the parish. We fixed their leaky roof, stocked their pantry, and left envelopes of cash on their doorstep, all anonymously. It wasn't about charity. It was about being a family. It was about living the gospel, not just preaching it. The Hope for the Homeless Fund was born out of that same spirit. It started with a simple mason jar at the back of the church. People gave what they could. Pocket change. A few dollars from their grocery budget. But it grew because people trusted that every cent would be used to help someone in need. I managed the books myself, not because I didn't trust anyone else, but because I saw it as a sacred responsibility. Every single coin was a prayer from someone's heart. Over 2 decades, St. Jude's became my entire world. The parishioners weren't just a congregation, they were my brothers and sisters, my aunts and uncles, my nieces and nephews. I was there for their baptisms, their weddings, and their funerals. They were the family I never had. Losing them was like having my heart torn from my chest. That's what Cromwell took from me. Not just a job, but my home, my love, my entire life. People often thought of me as serious, and I suppose I was. I found comfort in order, in meticulousness. My office was always tidy, my records perfectly kept. But it wasn't a cold obsession. To me, doing small things with great care was a way of honoring God. My only real vulnerability, I see now, was a deep-seated respect for authority. I was taught to trust my superiors in the church, to believe in their wisdom and guidance. I trusted Bishop Cromwell completely. The first time I met him, years ago, I was captivated. He had a vision for the diocese, a way of speaking that made you feel like you were part of something grand and important. He spoke of growth, of influence, of making our faith a powerful force in the city. I admired his ambition, even if it felt a little slick at times. I told myself that the church needed strong leaders like him to navigate the modern world. Looking back, there were small signs. A casual remark he once made about a wealthy donor being more useful than a dozen poor ones. The way he always seemed more concerned with the media's perception of an event than its spiritual impact. I dismissed these moments as the pressures of his position. I made excuses for him because I wanted to believe in the goodness of the man who was my leader, my bishop. But under my quiet guidance, St. Jude's was flourishing in its own way. We weren't building grand cathedrals, but we were building strong families. We weren't making headlines, but we were changing lives, one person at a time. Our little parish had become a beacon of warmth and authenticity in the diocese, a place where people felt genuinely seen and loved. And that, I believe, is what made us a target. Our humility was a quiet rebuke to his vanity. My life was profoundly simple. I lived in the small rectory attached to the church. My most valuable possessions were my books and a worn wooden cross my father had carved for me before he passed away. I didn't need or want more. My joy was in the morning Mass, in a shared cup of coffee with a parishioner, in the quiet moments of prayer when I felt closest to God. This simple, peaceful existence was the world he shattered. My parents were good, honest people who taught me that integrity was the one thing no one could ever take from you. They were gone now, and with no wife or children of my own, the church was truly all I had. It was my mother, my father, my spouse, and my child. St. Jude's was the inheritance of my heart, passed down from the spiritual family that raised me in faith. This is why I couldn't let the missing money go. It wasn't just an accounting error to me. It was a desecration. It was a violation of the sacred trust that held our community together. Protecting that fund, ensuring every penny went to its intended purpose, was not just a job. It was my solemn vow to God and to every single person who had ever put their faith in me and in our church. The day before I uncovered the final proof, I remember standing at the back of the empty church at dusk. The last rays of sun were filtering through the stained glass windows, painting the pews in hues of red and blue. A deep sense of peace washed over me. I felt so grateful for my life, for my flock, for my purpose. I had no idea that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and that the man I looked up to was about to push me over. It's very important that you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video, so that YouTube recommends this incredible story to more people. This way, you help us spread the gospel through real testimonies, so please help us in this noble cause. The world went silent. After the bishop's thunderous condemnation, a heavy, suffocating silence fell over me. As I was escorted out of the assembly hall, not a single person met my eye. Hands that had shaken mine in friendship just hours before were now tucked away. Voices that had sought my counsel now whispered behind my back. In the space of 10 minutes, I had become a ghost in my own life, invisible and untouchable. The loneliness was immediate and absolute, a cold blanket that smothered me right there in the hallway. My keys to the rectory were taken from me that same afternoon. I was given 1 hour to pack a single bag under the watchful eye of a diocesan official, a stern man who looked at me as if I were a contagion. I walked to the small home that had been mine for 20 years, my fingers brushing against the spines of my books, the worn fabric of my favorite chair. Every object held a memory, a piece of the life that was being surgically removed from me. I packed my father's wooden cross, my Bible, and a few changes of clothes. Everything else was left behind. That first night, I slept on a cot in a shelter, the very kind of place our Hope for the Homeless Fund was meant to support. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. I lay there in the dark, listening to the coughs and murmurs of other broken men, and I felt the full weight of what I had lost. It wasn't just a home or a job. It was my name, my honor, my family. Bishop Cromwell hadn't just fired me. He had excommunicated me from my entire existence. The next morning, it was official. My face was on the front page of the Providence Falls Chronicle, right below the fold. The headline was simple and brutal: "Fallen Father Accused of Embezzlement." The article was a masterpiece of Cromwell's narrative, quoting his sorrowful words and painting me as a wolf in shepherd's clothing. Seeing my own face staring back at me, branded a thief for the whole city to see, was a new kind of violation. It was a public stoning, and I had no stones to throw back. My phone, which used to ring constantly with calls from parishioners, fell silent. The few messages I received were not of support, but of condemnation. "How could you?" one text read. "We trusted you," said another. Even Mrs. Gable, a sweet old woman I'd visited in the hospital every week for a year, left me a tearful, angry voicemail. Each message was another nail in the coffin of the man I used to be. My spiritual family had turned on me completely, believing the word of the powerful over the quiet truth. I tried to reach out to a few fellow priests, men I considered friends, hoping for a single voice of reason. One didn't answer. Another told me, his voice strained, that it was best if we didn't speak. He was afraid, I realized, afraid of Cromwell's power, afraid of being tainted by association. The institution I had dedicated my life to, the brotherhood I cherished, had closed its ranks, leaving me outside in the cold. The fear of one powerful man was stronger than decades of friendship. With the little money I had in my personal savings, I found a small, single-room apartment above a laundromat on the far side of town. The air was always damp and smelled of bleach, and the noise from the machines below was a constant rumble. It was a world away from the peaceful quiet of the rectory garden. This tiny, grim room was my new sanctuary, my desert. It was here that my humiliation took root and began to grow into something else. The most painful moments were the small ones. I'd be in the grocery store and see someone from St. Jude's in the aisle. Their eyes would meet mine for a split second before darting away, their cart suddenly veering in the opposite direction. I saw Mr. and Mrs. Garcia, the family we had helped so much, and they pretended not to know me, hurrying their son Leo past me as if I might contaminate him. That look of fear and disgust from a child I had once blessed, it broke me in a way the bishop's lies never could. Finding work was nearly impossible. Who would hire a 45-year-old man whose only work experience was being a priest, especially one who was now a publicly disgraced thief? My name was Poison. After weeks of rejections, I finally found a job that didn't require a background check or a good name. I became a night janitor at the city bus station, working from midnight to dawn. My new flock was made up of weary travelers, runaways, and the homeless. My hands, which had once blessed sacraments and anointed the sick, now held a mop and a bucket. I cleaned filthy bathrooms and swept up the debris left behind by people living on the margins. There was a strange humility in the work. No one knew who I had been. I was just an invisible man in a gray uniform, cleaning up the messes of the world while my own life was a wreck. It was honest work, and in a way, it kept me sane. One night a young man recognized me while I was emptying a trash can. "Hey, aren't you that priest?" he sneered, nudging his friend. "The one who ripped off his own church?" They laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed in the cavernous station. I just kept my head down and continued my work. their laughter feeling like tiny, sharp stones being thrown at me. I didn't get angry. I felt a profound, chilling calm. This was the bottom. There was nowhere to go but up. Meanwhile, Bishop Cromwell was thriving. I'd see him on the news, dedicating the new cathedral wing that was, in part, paid for with the money he stole. He stood there, beaming, accepting the applause of the city's elite. He was praised for his leadership, his vision, his piety. He was a celebrated hero, while I was scrubbing toilets for a living. The injustice was so profound, so blatant, that it burned away my sorrow, leaving something harder and colder in its place. The initial shock and grief began to curdle into a different kind of emotion. It wasn't hatred, it was a cold, righteous anger. An anger not just for myself, but for the people who had been robbed, for the trust that had been shattered, and for the holy office that Cromwell had so thoroughly desecrated. He had used God's house as his own personal bank, and he had used my good name to cover his tracks. This was not just a crime against me, it was a crime against God. In the solitude of my tiny apartment, surrounded by the rumble of washing machines, I began to pray differently. I stopped asking God, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" I read my Bible not for comfort but for strategy. I found myself drawn to the stories of David and Goliath, of Daniel in the lion's den, of the prophets who spoke truth to corrupt kings. These weren't just stories of faith. They were stories of divine justice, enacted by the powerless. My faith, which had been shaken to its core, began to solidify again, but it was different now. It was no longer the soft, comforting faith of a parish priest. It was the hard, unyielding faith of a warrior. God had allowed me to be brought this low for a reason. He had stripped me of everything, my title, my reputation, my community, so that I would have nothing left to lose and nothing to rely on but Him. I thought about the evidence I had compiled, the encrypted drive I had hidden away before ever confronting the bishop. It was a small, tangible piece of the truth in a world of lies. I had naively believed that the truth alone would be enough, that a man of God would bow to it. I was wrong. Cromwell didn't fear the truth. He only feared being exposed. He didn't fear God. He feared public opinion, and that, I realized, was his weakness. His greatest strength was his public image, the mask of piety he wore so well he had built his entire career on it. If I could somehow crack that mask, if I could force him to reveal the monster underneath to the whole world, that would be a justice far more profound than any court could deliver. My goals shifted. It wasn't about clearing my name anymore. It was about forcing his confession. I remembered a verse from the book of Proverbs that Father Thomas used to quote, "Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy." Cromwell had concealed his sins by burying me under them. I would not offer him mercy. But I would, with God's help, make him confess. The path wasn't clear yet, but the destination was. The humiliation I felt at the bus station, the scorn from former friends, the sight of Cromwell's smug face on television, it all coalesced into a single point of focus. My anger was no longer a fire burning me up from the inside. It was being forged into a tool, a weapon of cold, hard steel. I was no longer a victim wallowing in despair. I was a man with a mission. I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror of my small bathroom. The man looking back was thinner, his eyes were tired, and his hands were calloused from manual labor. I didn't see Father Michael, the beloved priest of St. Jude's, anymore. I saw a stranger, someone who had been through a fire and come out the other side changed. The shepherd had been cast out, but the wolf was still in the fold. My isolation became my training ground, my menial job became my cover, my anonymity became my shield. Cromwell thought he had destroyed me, that he had silenced me forever. He had no idea that in casting me into the darkness, he had given me the perfect place to plan my counterattack. He had made me invisible. And an invisible man can move in ways no one expects. I knelt on the cold linoleum floor of my room, my father's wooden cross clutched in my hand. I wasn't praying for my old life back. I was praying for strength, for wisdom, and for clarity. I was praying for the opportunity to bring the truth into the light, no matter the cost. My fall was complete, but it was not the end. It was the beginning. The rumble of the washing machines below sounded like a distant drumbeat, the start of a slow, steady march. The fight would not be easy. Bishop Cromwell was a powerful man with powerful friends. I was a disgraced janitor with nothing but the truth and my faith. But in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that it would be enough. He had taken my collar, my home, and my name. He had left me with nothing. But he had forgotten one crucial thing. He had left me with God. And with God on my side, I was ready to bring about a divine reckoning. The period of my fall was over. Now, it was time to plan my rise. Bishop Cromwell thought he had buried me, but he made a critical mistake. He assumed that because I was a man of God, I was a simple man. He mistook my humility for weakness and my faith for naivete. In the quiet desperation of my tiny room, that faith transformed. I began to see that God doesn't just call on us to endure injustice. Sometimes, He calls on us to become the instrument of His correction. My hidden resource wasn't money or power. It was the very character He had mocked. My meticulous nature, the one that led me to keep perfect parish records, was the same nature that compelled me to act before I ever confronted Him. Days before that fateful meeting in His office, a small, persistent voice in my prayers, a feeling I can only describe as the Holy Spirit's guidance, urged me to be cautious. I listened. I spent an entire night making a complete, bit-for-bit copy of the diocesan financial servers I had access to, creating a perfect digital snapshot of his crimes. That evidence was secured on a small, encrypted hard drive, no bigger than a credit card. It wasn't just a collection of numbers. It was a detailed narrative of his greed, showing the exact path the money took from the collection plates of hard-working families to the accounts that funded his expensive suits and lavish dinners. It was the undeniable, unalterable truth, hidden away in a safe deposit box, waiting for the right moment. Cromwell thought he had destroyed the evidence, but he had only destroyed the forgeries he created to frame me. But having the truth and being able to reveal it are two very different things. If I went to the press or the police, I was a disgraced, discredited priest. It would be my word against a powerful, charismatic bishop. He would paint me as a bitter, vengeful liar, and people would believe him. I knew that a direct assault would fail. I needed a different path, a way to make the truth come from his own lips. That's when my true purpose became clear. My weapon wouldn't be the hard drive itself, but the fear of what was on it, and my strategy came directly from the Word of God. I kept returning to Proverbs chapter 28, verse 13. Whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. My goal was not to destroy him, but to orchestrate a situation so perfectly, so overwhelmingly, that he would be forced to confess. It was to be a divine reckoning, not a personal one. To do this, I needed more than data. I needed to understand the man. I needed an ally, someone on the inside who knew Cromwell's weaknesses. I prayed for guidance, and a name came to me, a memory from years ago. Sister Agnes. She was a retired nun, sharp as a tack, who had managed the diocesan finances for 40 years before Cromwell gently pushed her into retirement. She never liked him, and she saw the ambition in his eyes from day one. Finding her wasn't easy. She was living a quiet life in a small convent 2 towns over. I visited her one afternoon, unannounced. She looked at me through the screen door, my disgraced face now familiar from the newspapers. I didn't plead or make excuses. I simply said, "Sister, you know the truth about that man, and I have the proof. I need your help to save the soul of our diocese." She saw the conviction in my eyes, not of a thief, but of a soldier. Sister Agnes became my secret weapon. She was a treasure trove of information. She knew every political game Cromwell played, every donor he flattered, every secret ambition he held. Most importantly, she knew his greatest weakness, his monumental pride. He was obsessed with his public image, terrified of appearing weak or flawed. His entire identity was built on the foundation of being seen as a powerful, pious leader. She told me about his routines, his upcoming projects, and the people whose opinions he valued most. She explained how he used the cathedral renovation project not as an act of faith, but as a monument to himself. With her wisdom, I began to see a path forward. The hard drive was the bullet, but Sister Agnes's knowledge was the sniper scope that would let me aim it not at his career, but directly at his conscience. Cromwell had no idea. He saw me as a janitor, a broken man scrubbing floors at a bus station. He likely pitied me, or worse, had forgotten me entirely. He never imagined that the quiet, dutiful priest he'd cast aside possessed the strategic mind to wage a psychological war. He thought he had taken away my power, but he had only taken away my chains. I was now free to move in the shadows, unseen and utterly underestimated. My nightly work as a janitor became the perfect cover. The anonymity was a blessing. I could spend my days planning, piecing together the information from Sister Agnes with the data on my drive, crafting a plan of attack that was silent, subtle, and spiritually guided. I wasn't plotting revenge in the traditional sense. I was setting the stage for a divine intervention, and I would be the stagehand working behind the curtain. The plan began to form, not as a single dramatic explosion, but as a series of small, carefully placed cracks in the foundation of his world. I would not reveal the evidence all at once. Instead, I would leak small, anonymous pieces of information to just the right people. A skeptical journalist, a major donor, enough to plant seeds of doubt and force Cromwell to look over his shoulder. I would use his own ambition against him. His grandest project, the televised dedication of the new cathedral wing, was meant to be his crowning achievement. I would make it his judgment seat. This would be the stage where he would be confronted, not by me, but by his own sins. The entire city would be watching, and God would be the judge. My despair was gone, replaced by a cold, clear purpose. Every dirty floor I mopped, every piece of trash I collected, was an act of humility that fueled my resolve. I was no longer Father Michael, the disgraced priest. I was a man on a mission from God, armed with the truth, guided by wisdom, and shielded by the cloak of invisibility that my enemy himself had given me. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. Bishop Alistair Cromwell, in his arrogance, believed he was untouchable, a king in his castle. He had no idea that a humble janitor, a ghost from his past, was about to checkmate him in front of the entire world, using nothing but the bishop's own guilty conscience as the final move. The game was about to begin. Before I reveal how the revenge unfolded, it is very important that you subscribe to the channel and leave a like on the video, so that YouTube recommends this incredible story to more people. This way, you help us spread the gospel through real testimonies of faith, so please, help us in this noble cause. The first step was small, almost silent. From a public library computer miles from my neighborhood, I sent an anonymous email to a local blogger, a young woman with a reputation for chasing stories the mainstream news ignored. The email contained a single, heavily redacted document showing a minor budget discrepancy in the diocese's charity accounts. It was nothing conclusive, just a loose thread. I didn't accuse anyone. I simply asked the question, where is the oversight? It was a stone tossed into a still pond, and I just had to wait for the ripples to reach the shore. The ripples arrived faster than I expected. Sister Agnes, my eyes and ears inside the diocesan walls, called me on my untraceable burner phone a week later. She said the bishop was quietly furious, asking his staff, who might have a grudge, who could be leaking information. He couldn't address the blog post publicly that would give it credibility, but the seed of paranoia had been planted. He was looking for an enemy, never suspecting the ghost he'd already banished was the one haunting him. His fear was the first sign that my plan, guided by prayer, was working. For the second phase, I aimed higher. Sister Agnes had told me about Mr. Harrington, the elderly construction magnate who had donated millions for the new cathedral wing. He was a man of deep faith and old-fashioned integrity. This time, the anonymous package was sent via courier. It contained a slightly less redacted ledger page, showing a clear transfer from the Hope for the Homeless Fund to a diocesan beautification account that didn't officially exist. The accompanying note was simple. A good man's legacy should be built on a foundation of truth. Ask for a full audit. That move put Bishop Cromwell in an impossible position. His grand project, his monument to himself, was now under scrutiny from its primary benefactor. Sister Agnes confirmed that Mr. Harrington had requested a private meeting and a full, independent audit of the renovation funds. Cornered and desperate to project an image of strength, Cromwell did exactly what we predicted. He announced that the dedication mass for the new wing would be held in 2 weeks, and it would be broadcast live on local television. He was trying to create an unassailable spectacle of piety to silence the growing whispers. He was building his own stage for his own execution. The night before the Mass was my final move. I typed a short letter, put it in a plain envelope, and mailed it from a post office across town so it would be delivered to his office first thing in the morning. Inside were 2 things. First, a single printout of a bank transfer showing money from our homeless fund, paying for a custom-tailored silk cassock from Rome, a vanity so specific, so personal, he would know the source of the information was irrefutable. Second, on a small handwritten card were the words I had prayed over for months. Proverbs chapter 28, verse 13. It was not a threat. It was an ultimatum from God, delivered by my hand. I did not go to the cathedral for the dedication. My place was in my small room, watching a grainy live feed on an old television set. I saw the packed pews, the city's elite in the front rows, the news cameras poised for his triumphant moment. When Cromwell stepped up to the pulpit, his face was a mask of practiced confidence. But as he looked out at the crowd, his eyes darted around, searching. I knew what he was seeing. The ghost of the man he'd wronged, the weight of the letter in his pocket, the judgment of God in every shadow. His confident smile faltered. He began his sermon, but the words were hollow. He stammered, his gaze lost. Sweat beaded on his forehead under the bright television lights. Then he stopped. The cathedral fell into a stunned silence. He looked directly into the main camera, as if he were looking at me, and he broke. Tears streamed down his face as a rambling, choked confession poured out of him. He admitted to the theft, to the lies, to framing an innocent man to cover his sins. He confessed it all, his downfall broadcast live to the entire city he had tried so desperately to impress. In my room, I clutched my father's wooden cross, closed my eyes, and whispered the only words that mattered. Thy will be done.